I swear to God, I will never hear Long Cool Woman in a black dress again without thinking of that rocking chair. Songs have this effect on people. We associate certain songs with certain times in our past. You know, like every time I hear Oasis perform Wonderwall in a nasally, horribly British accent, I think of Jenny Lydon. Why? Because Wonderwall was our prom theme, Jenny was my date, and she did more for that tight, low-cut number than any other girl in the audience. But back to the rocking chair. You see, it was a Maloof made by old Sam Maloof before he died, and 20-odd years ago it cost my old man $20,000. For a rocking chair, you say? Hell yeah, but it's more than a rocking chair. It's a goddamn full-blown work of art in Clara Walnut, hand-carved with smooth joinery, and it's damn comfortable to sit in. Oh, and it was the only worthwhile thing this father left me, but I liked it anyway. Anyway, I walked into my mansion in Brentwood and heard the stereo running. Ringing, echo-filled guitar or arpeggios at the beginning were followed by pulsing power chords that transitioned into vocals. A great arrangement that is more complex than most people realize. Not exactly my cup of tea, of course, but still a great arrangement. I paused and listened to the vocals. The strong reverb on the voice made it hard to make out the lyrics. Saturday night, I was downtown, working for the FBI. I followed the music, throwing my jacket on the back of the couch, and then rolled into the family room. It had been a long day at the agent's office where I was trying to negotiate the terms of a new deal, and all I wanted to do was sit in a chair, drink a beer, and see if Tara was in the mood. She always got bitchy just before we started filming a new season, and we hadn't shot the monster with 2 backs in almost 2 weeks. I walked into the family room and froze. Tara was in the mood, all right. There she was in my rocking chair from Maloof, and underneath her lay my bandmate Carl, who was in both the Maloof rocking chair and Tara at the same time. He was in my favorite chair and with my former favorite wife, and I wasn't sure which made me angrier. A barrage of thoughts rained down on my brain. Why is she cheating on me with him? And here I'll admit my thoughts got a little weird. Why hadn't I ever thought of that? I wonder if old Sam Maloof tested his chairs in a similar way. And finally, if they break this damn chair, pardon the pun, I'm gonna wring their goddamn necks. I stood like that for probably a minute and a half, because the Hollies were in the middle of an instrumental break, when Carl finally turned his glazed eyes on me. He froze and tried to jump up from his chair. I just stood there while he tried to free himself from the chair. I froze and didn't know what to do. Really, what to do. I guess I could go after them, but that would get us all on the covers of all the newspapers, tabloids, and trashy magazines for the next year. Besides, I couldn't afford to hurt my hands, or Carl's for that matter, or the band would be out of luck in the middle of negotiating a new record. So I didn't do anything, just turned and walked toward the bedroom at the far end of the hallway. I was buttoning up a fresh shirt when I saw Tara's reflection in the mirror. "Where are you going?" she asked, avoiding my gaze. I tried to smile, but I couldn't. Instead, I just stared at her for a minute. Tara Boyd, teen idol turned glamorous and beautiful star of one of the highest-rated shows in television history. My wife, my life, and now, apparently, neither. "We didn't mean for this to happen," she said, sitting down on the bed and watching me rummage through my huge closet. I finally found a large shopping bag and began stuffing it with shoes, jeans, pants, and shirts. Once I had enough, I dragged the bag back into the bedroom, over to the dresser where I began shoveling underwear and socks into the small space left. "That's it," said Tara. "You're not even going to say anything?" I ignored her. I'd never really thought about how I'd feel if something like that happened to me, but the few times I'd thought about it, I was sure I'd explode. However, strangely enough, that didn't happen. On the contrary, I felt tired, exhausted. The wind had left my sails, and I was suddenly and inexplicably adrift. "Damn it, Nick!" "Say something," she said, now yelling at me. "What the hell do you want me to say?" I huffed, pushed the duffel back to the floor, and turned to her. "Is there a manual somewhere on how to handle one of your oldest friends and your wife having fun with each other behind your back, Tara? Huh? I mean, what am I supposed to say? What do you want me to say?" And that was it. All my energy was gone again, and I just wanted to crawl away somewhere and die. So I dragged my duffel bag past Tara and down the hall, stopping at the bathroom to grab my toothbrush, razors, and other nonsense. Once I had everything packed, I dragged the bag to the garage, threw it in my Escalade, and walked back into the house. Carl was sitting in the rocking chair lacing up his shoes when I walked in. "Listen, Nick," he started, but I didn't want to listen to him. "I just want my chair," I said. He jumped off it, getting out of my way. I pulled up the chair and nodded toward the 9 Grammy Awards and the stack of platinum, multi-platinum, and diamond-framed albums in the display case. "You and Tara packed my stuff, okay?" "Where are you going?" he asked. "Nick, you're in charge of the negotiations, man. You're not going to leave, are you? Have everything delivered to my mom's house?" I continued, ignoring him. "And I'll set it up there." I dragged the chair to the Escalade, put it in the back seat next to a couple guitars already stacked there from a few days before, and went to get in the car. "Nick," Carl pleaded, "please, man, let me explain." I lowered my head, counting to 10. "We didn't mean for this to happen," he continued. "I mean, you had to negotiate all day, dude." I glared. "So what didn't you want to happen? Did you entertain her, or did I get you?" I didn't wait for his answer, preferring to hop in my ride and get out of there as fast as I could. Chapter 2. I was now 3 hours away and more than 250 miles west of the City of Angels. Let the whole rotten hole fall into the ocean. Okay, not the whole thing, just Brentwood. "Where are we going?" he asked. His voice was hoarse, the result of a 40-year habit of 3 packs a day. "Home," I said, not bothering to look at him. "Home to Brentwood?" "Home to the house," I said. "Home in Grant City." "But you don't live there anymore," he said. "Yeah, well, stuff happens," I said. "Things change." "Is that all?" He grinned. "Just drop everything and run away? Give up on her?" I remained silent as he did for another 30 miles or so. "They're all like that, you know," he finally uttered. "Not all of them," I replied. "No," he agreed, "only the ones you choose." I nodded. He was right. "What makes you think that?" He laughed. It was a deep, rolling laugh that ended in a rattling cough. "Because you're a petty asshole." "Well, congratulations," I said. "Looks like the apple didn't fall far from the tree." "Screw you." I sighed. This was going nowhere, and I knew it wouldn't be long before this led to another fight, and he was gone. Strangely enough, I wished he'd stick around with me for a while longer. We were silent for about 10 more miles before I turned and looked at him. He looked the same as he always did. I could almost reach out and touch him, but I knew my hand would only go through him. Still, I could always smell his faint odor, a mixture of cigarette smoke and Lagerfeld's cologne. "You know," he finally said, "you should have kicked his ass. And what would that have accomplished?" He would have known he wouldn't do it again. "For God's sake, Walter," I said. He knew not to do it from the start. And neither did she. But that didn't stop either of them, did it? Walter shrugged. "Yeah, I guess it did. But you'd feel better if you hadn't run off with your tail between your legs." "Yeah," I replied. "Then I'd have damn swollen arms to play with. I'd probably spend the night with a bunch of West Hollywood cross-dressers. The tabloids would be crawling all over our asses, and they'd still be entertaining each other in my goddamn chair." "My chair," he said. "I bought it." "Yeah, but you're dead now," I said. "So now it's mine." He turned away and looked out the window, watching the night desert whiz past us at 80 miles an hour. "I guess you're right," he said. "Still, I'd kick his ass." Chapter 3. We were approaching the turn from Interstate 15 onto Interstate 70 when my cell phone rang. It was almost 11, and I had been on the road for almost 8 hours. The call brought me out of my monotony, and I realized I was starting to get tired. Glancing at the display, I decided to answer it. "Hey, John," I said to our lead guitarist. "Nick, where the hell are you?" he said. He yelled, and I could hear the loud noise of some nightclub in the background. "Utah?" I said. "What the hell are you doing in Utah? I'm driving." I heard John yell to someone else. Then he was back on the phone. "Nick, you need to get back here. You're our main man, and we're close to a big deal. Let Ethan handle it," I replied. Ethan Rose was our manager, and he damn sure made enough money and was interested enough in the outcome to handle it without our help. "Dude, John Wind, you know he can't do it without you. They want to know what we're up to, what's in the bunker. Ethan can't take care of that. Only you can, man." "Let me think about it," I said, and hung up the phone before turning it off. We started lead foot when I was a sophomore at Grant City High School. There were 4 of us: Teddy Cooper on lead guitar, Carl Simpson on bass, Vince Diamond on drums, and me on rhythm guitar and vocals. The other three harmonized, and we had kind of an eagle sound. In the middle of our junior year, Teddy discovered alternative country rock. I'll never forget the day I walked over to his house and entered his bedroom. Dual vocals played over a rattling acoustic guitar and country-like slides. "Who's that?" I asked, instantly loving the song. "Jay Hawks," he replied, not taking his eyes off the flyer. "That's awesome," I commented. He only nodded. For the next 3 hours, we listened to Hollywood Town Hall over and over again. To this day, I remember that day every time I hear Two Angels. The very next day, Teddy and I started writing our first song. It came out surprisingly fast, at least the music. But the lyrics weren't so easy. Then, Teddy decided to start reading more serious literature, poetry, Shakespeare, the Bible, and other stuff. According to him, it inspired him, and he was right. Pretty soon, we were churning out lyrics left and right in music to them. Then I started reading the whole thing, too. Pretty soon, Teddy was back to focusing on the music and only occasionally helping with the lyrics. The summer after graduation, Leadfoot won a talent contest at the Lincoln County Fair, which got us sent to compete at the Illinois State Fair. There, we were surrounded by ballet dancers, jugglers, magicians, and a few aspiring musicians, and we performed 3 songs in close harmony. When it was over, there was no doubt that the crowd was on our side. Let's get this straight. When 50-year-old farmers and their wives are stomping to the tunes of a group of teenagers, you're on to something. When it was announced that we came in second place behind some cute dancer named Shirley Temple, there were cheers from the crowd. Anyway, after the show, some 30-year-old guy in slacks with hair mousse and sparkly jewelry came up to us. His name was Ethan Rose, and he was a talent scout for Harmony Records. According to him, they were looking for something out of the ordinary and wanted to know if we'd be interested in meeting anyone. We agreed and spent the next 3 weeks before college classes started auditioning in Nashville and Memphis. A month later, already during our first semesters at different colleges, Ethan contacted us and offered us a recording contract. That's when the trouble started. Teddy decided he didn't want to stay in the band. He thought we'd be horrors for the record industry, selling out for money. I told him that was bullshit, that's what happened. In reality, Teddy was just afraid of failure down the road and didn't want to risk the good things he had. He was always the smartest of the bunch and had a full academic scholarship. He didn't want to be a superstar, he wanted to be a teacher. So he quit, and Ethan got busy finding a replacement on lead guitar. Over Christmas break, Carl, Vince, and I flew to Memphis to start rehearsing and auditioning a new lead guitarist. With Ethan's help, and at the insistence of the record company, we settled on the first choice, which was John Booma. John was 4 years older than us, but he knew how to play guitar. He had been doing studio music for the last 3 years, sort of a teenage wonder kind, looking for the right fit, and the record company thought he would fit into the Leadfoot sound. They were right. It helped that he had a nice tenor and could help me with songwriting. He wasn't very good with lyrics, though, so that fell on my shoulders. Carl and Vince were happy to just play their instruments and sing when asked. You know the rest? Our first album, Somewhere Down Highway 66, went multi-platinum. Then we beat the sophomore jinx by releasing Plain States, our first and to date only diamond platinum album, which sold over 13 million copies. Since then, a few have come close, but for the last 6 years we've basically been riding the wave of our first 2 works. Now we're negotiating a new contract. Harmony sold our contract a long time ago, and Columbia wanted a 5-record deal. We were very attractive, but they needed assurances that we wouldn't leave them halfway through. That's where I stepped in as a liaison. The band needed to prove that we had a solid supply of songs that would allow us to last for a while, and I was the logical choice to prove it. The problem was that we didn't have a large stockpile of good songs. Sure, we had a bunch of dross, and by just putting our name on them, we probably would have sold a few million copies, at least the first few albums. But we were getting stale, and I realized that. The other guys, including Ethan, didn't want to hear it. Oh no, they were all chirping, just sell it to them. We'll get the money and everything will be just fine. Unfortunately, Columbia saw the stock for what it was and offered a better deal than any of us realized. So here I am trying to save the band, get them more money, and keep them surrounded by adoring fans who booed them before, during, and after the shows. And what kind of gratitude do I get for my efforts? I get that they constantly pester my ass and Carl entertains my wife. At least there's some gratitude. Chapter 4. By 2 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, I'd been on the road for nearly 22 hours, and the always breathtaking Nebraska scenery had me dosing off behind the wheel. Did Bruce Springsteen write a whole damn album named after this god-forsaken flat sea? I always knew he was awesome, but this first drive through Nebraska convinced me that he should be canonized. Not wanting to take any more chances, I pulled off the highway and Grand Island and checked into a Holiday Inn. After checking into the hotel, I dragged my suitcase into my room, plugged my phone into the charger, turned on the air conditioning, and collapsed on the bed. I'm sure I fell asleep before my head even touched the pillow, and my dreams were long and disturbing. In each of them, Tara appeared in a different role, and few of them were good. That's where I woke up. The air conditioner cooled the sweat pouring down my face and shirt. Shaking the cobwebs and still vivid images from my head, I reached for my cell phone and looked at the indicator light. "Hey, Ethan," I said. "Jesus Christ," he said. "Where the hell are you, Nick?" I was in no mood to put up with any more of this shit. "I won't be back for a while, Ethan," I said. "You're going to have to take care of this on your own. I'll read it when I have time. But we can't do it without you. You know that? Just don't sign anything until I read it, okay?" I continued. He was silent for a minute. "Nick," he said slowly, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" I didn't answer anything. "Jesus, Nick, please tell me that you're really not thinking about, making an escape from us. Just don't sign anything, Ethan, got it? Come on, Nick, we'll get rid of the bastard before we risk losing you," he said. "Bass players are plentiful right now, even good ones like Carl." Shit, I thought. The cat's already out of the bag. No doubt this would hit the press within days, not weeks. "We'll talk later," I said. "Do what you can, but don't sign anything until I give the okay." I disconnected the phone before he could say anything else. It was already getting dark outside, and the bedside clock showed it was almost 10. I had gotten enough sleep, so I decided to shower, clean up, change into clean clothes, and hit the road again. With the scenery, nightmares, and the phone call with Ethan, I couldn't get out of Nebraska fast enough. Chapter 5. 3.5 hours later, I was in Iowa. "So you're going to drop everything?" asked Walter. "Group, bug, big money?" "I don't know," I said. "And I didn't. But you're thinking about it." I nodded. Ethan was right, He continued, looking straight ahead at the occasional pair of oncoming headlights. "If you're too cowardly to beat the crap out of him, let the group get rid of him. Why should you be the one running away? Then you'll have your band, your money, your fame, and best of all, your revenge on Carl. Where the hell is he going to go without you?" "Maybe I was going to leave anyway," I suggested. He snorted. "Screw you, Walter," I said. "You remember how it was? I know. You remember being on top of the world after those first few books, and then it all went downhill when you got carried away by the glory and splendor of being famous and famous." Oh, I thought, good text. I wrote that phrase down in my bank of random phrases. Walter was silent for about an hour, so I decided to leave him alone and concentrate on driving. Iowa was little better than Nebraska, but here at least there was some ground rolling, which became more and more noticeable as we approached the Mississippi River. I brought him back," Walter said, interrupting my thoughts. "I remember," I replied. "Too well. That's not why I left Nick." I remained silent. It was already over long before I finally left. What was her name? Trudy? He nodded, and I continued. "Yeah, I think Trudy just made it a little easier, didn't she?" "You're right," he said, staring at me. "I was a shit. Everyone knew that. I was like that pissy little Aunt Capote. Wrote some good stuff, became a celebrity, decided I liked being a celebrity better than writing. But it was the celebrity that ruined everything, not Trudy. Sure, we fought. Heck, try working 16 hours, 7 days a week for 6 months, filming your TV show, and spending the other half of the year traveling, doing commercials, charity events, talk shows, and movies. Then take your husband and give him the same work and travel schedule. Add to all of this the endless joy of having people throwing themselves at you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, buying you drinks, trying to get you and almost every day away from each other, offering you their piece of ass. It's hectic to say the least. I'm not saying my life sucks or anything. It's certainly better than working 9 to 5 in an iron foundry, but do realize what it's like and the stresses it causes. Try going out to dinner with your wife so you're not surrounded by photographers and admirers. Enjoy a vacation when you don't have paparazzi helicopters hovering over you. When you consider the endless hype and long absences, it's amazing that any of our professions manage to keep marriages alive. Nevertheless, I thought we were doing very well. Better than most, truth be told. Until a day and a half ago when my little bubble burst. Chapter 7. Mom! I called out, dragging my duffel bag through the front door. No one locked their doors in Grant City, so my easy entrance wasn't a sign that anyone was home. Hearing no response, I leaned the duffel bag against the wall and looked around the living room. I hadn't been here in almost 7 years right after the first album came out, but everything was the same. I suppose a few pieces of furniture had been rearranged, and the couch was definitely new since my last visit. Still, it was nice to come home. Hi, I heard her voice from the top of the stairs. Hi, Mom, I echoed. It's Nick. Nick. Some shuffling was heard from upstairs. My eyes widened, and a smirk began to spread across my cheeks. I realized she wasn't alone. Nick, what are you doing here? She said, throwing on her robe and walking down the stairs. Caught you at a bad time, Mom? Wipe the smile off your face, young man, she said, tying her belt before wrapping her arms around me and pulling me tight against her. I hugged her back. It had been too long. It was our first hug since I dropped her off at the airport over 18 months ago. She'd spent a week with us in Brentwood, and we'd hugged like this the last time I'd seen her. She broke the hug and pulled away, looking me over from head to toe. You look like shit, honey. Am I disturbing you, Mom? If so, I can get a motel room for the night. You know, so you can take care of business. Bob, she called as she climbed the stairs. Get dressed and come down here. My boy has come to visit his dear old mother. Bob, said I, raising my eyebrows. Like Dr. Bob? The chiropractor? She smiled. But Mom, I said, not knowing whether to be proud of her or embarrassed. He's 15 years younger than you. She nodded. And thank God he is, she said, or he wouldn't be able to keep up with me. Hey, Nick, Dr. Bob called out to me, tucking in his shirt at the top of the stairs. This is a pleasant surprise. I shifted my gaze from him to her, then back to him. Sorry to bother you, I said. I probably should have called first. He came down the stairs. Nonsense, he said. It's good to see you again. Besides, Mom cut in, we're already done anyway. He blushed, but there was genuine affection in his gaze, and there was no doubt about it. Let's go, Mom said, turning and heading for the kitchen. Let me make you something to eat. You look like you could use it, Nick. The rumbling in my stomach told me she was right. It had been over 40 hours since I'd left California, and I'd settled for a few candy bars, bottled water, and a turkey sandwich from the store. Bob and I chatted, catching up on Grant City news while Mom busied herself with making grilled cheese and tomato soup. My favorite dish since childhood, and no one made it better than Mom. The key was homemade tomato soup, which she always kept in containers in the freezer. So how's Tara? Asked Bob when we were all seated at the small table in the kitchen. I tried to smile, but to no avail. Trouble, asked Mom. Her or you, said Bob. When my look told him I didn't understand, he clarified which one of you is cheating. Her or you, or both of you, I guess. He laughed. After all, you're in California now. She is, I said, with Carl. Carl Simpson, my mom said. I nodded. He was always a jerk, she said, taking a bite out of her sandwich. Bob choked on her characterization and nearly spewed his soup across the table at me. Mom had always been like that. If anyone could be more straightforward than Walter, it was Mom. I'm sure that's why he loved her so much. It's also why her students loved her. She called a spade, and her literary criticism didn't have an ounce of tried-and-true bullshit in it. She thought Moby Dick sucked, and she preached it to anyone who wanted to hear it. Thaddeus Tobido, president of Chadwick College, rarely appreciated her outspokenness. But he had a hard time getting rid of a tenured professor, so popular with students and alumni, and so recognized and respected in the national academic community. All in all, she was a real coup for a backwater like Chadwick, to Tobido's eternal regret. Carol, Bob finally managed to mumble. That's the way it was, Bob, she said. Little Eddie Haskell, who's been acting like a jerk since day one. You look lovely today, Mrs. Harlan. And did you change something in your hair, Mrs. Harlan? Pathetic, even when he was little. I smiled. She was right, but most parents fed off that crap. Carol was always the most well-mannered, the most polite, and the first to offer to help take out the trash. But when his parents weren't around, he was also the first to smoke a joint, pull out a bottle of vodka he'd swiped when someone wasn't looking, and call just about everyone and everything names. All in all, he was fun, wild, and reckless. "So what are you going to do?" said Bob. I shrugged, finishing the last bite of my sandwich. "I don't know," I said with my mouth full of food. After swallowing, I continued. "If it's okay with you, I'd like to stay here for a while, Mom. What to relax and think. It's hard to think in L.A., you know?" She looked at me, pursing her lips, and thought for a moment before nodding. "Well," she said, "I guess I'm okay with that, as long as Bob's okay with it." My eyes widened. "Bob?" "We live together now," she said, reaching across the table and taking his hand in hers. "You're kidding, right?" I looked at Bob, and he looked a little uncomfortable. "What about Elaine, Bob?" "She left me," he said. "A couple years ago, your mom and I have been living together for the last 8 months. And you didn't think to tell me that?" I asked my mom. "No," she replied. "It's none of your damn business. And if you cared that much, you would have called me Nick. But you didn't, not once in the 8 months we've lived together." "Yes, I did," I objected. "I called you at Christmas." "That was New Year's Eve," Bob said. "We woke up together then, and your mom asked if I'd stay for a while. I thought she meant a few hours, but she meant a lot more time." I laughed. Everything was suddenly so clear. Bob and Mom went out on New Year's Eve, got drunk, and ended up in bed together. Honestly, it was a good move for Bob. Even though Mom was 15 years younger than him, she still looked about his age. Don't think of me as a tapus rex, but I'll readily admit that Mom is a hottie, and God knows she's the life of every party she goes to. So yeah, it wasn't as weird as it sounds. "What's so funny?" she asked, frowning. I ignored her. "So, Bob, what do you say? Can I stay here?" "I'll try not to get in your way." He saw my smirk and grinned back. Then his face turned serious and he put a hand on my shoulder. "Well, son," he said. I was at a loss for words, and the milk I had just gulped down ran out of my nose as I convulsively laughed at the whole merry-go-round that had suddenly become my life. Chapter 8. Immediately after dinner, I went to bed and slept for 7 hours. When I woke up, I showered, brushed my teeth, got dressed, and went downstairs. The note on the refrigerator spoke for itself. "I'm teaching a class today, and Bob is in the office. You're on your own for dinner. Love, C." I didn't feel like spending the evening alone in front of the TV. On the contrary, the last 2 days spent with just me, Walter, and the flat plains of the American countryside were causing me to need company. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot at the Hitchhiker's Hitch. I'd worked there, first as a waiter, then as a cook when I was in high school, and the food was the best in town. Think of Chili's or TGI Fridays only with homemade food, not pre-packaged, tasteless, overpriced crap. Judging by the packed parking lot at 7.30 on a Thursday night, they're still not discouraged. Seeing that the dining room was full, I headed to the bar and ordered a beer. "Nikki," someone behind me called out, and I turned around. Victoria was walking towards me, arms outstretched for the upcoming full-body squeeze. "Hey, Vic," I sighed as my body found itself pressed against her huge frame. "They said it was you, Nikki," she said, as she put her arm around my shoulders and pulled back to look at me. I didn't believe them, but, well, I'll be damned. Then she hugged me again. Victoria Wentworth and her husband Ron had owned the Hitchhikers for over 30 years. Ron ran the kitchen, and Victoria ran the dining room. They were both stern managers. I learned early on that perfectionism and everything was the only way to succeed in the bar and grill business. But the high school kids they hired to fill out the staff became family, and they treated us like the kids they never had. Gifts for birthdays, cards full of money for graduation, and harsh floggings for the slightest misstep on the job. And they were the only ones who called me Nikki. "It's been too long, Nick," she said. 4 years, I think. You're right, too. That's too long. I looked around the establishment, recognizing most of the customers. A few of them nodded at me, and I nodded back and smiled. "Looks like nothing much has changed, Vic," I said. She glared. "No, still the best burger in town." She grabbed my hand and pulled me along. "Come on, you should stop by and say hi to Ron. He's a little busy right now, but I know he'll be happy to see you." Sure enough, Ron was in the kitchen, his white shirt and faded jeans immaculate against the grease, smoke, and sauces that were being cooked, arranged, and laid out on the counter in a fine-tuned order. He barked orders like a sergeant, and it wasn't until a minute later that he noticed us. He started to shout something to Victoria, but then stopped with his mouth hanging open. "Nikki!" I nodded. His face spread into a wide grin, showing the 2 teeth he'd lost in a bar fight in Singapore, and he staggered over to the steam tables. Pushing aside 2 cooks, he enclosed me in an embrace that would put both the boa constrictor and Victoria to shame. "Damn it, son," he whispered fiercely. "It's good to see you again." Then he too pulled me back at arm's length and looked me over from head to toe. "You look like shit," he said. "Too gaunt. And when was the last time you slept?" I tried to guffaw. "California lifestyle, Pops," I said. "Too many salads, not enough steaks." He laughed at that, a rolling laugh from deep within his bulging belly. "God damn women eating a bunch of shit that's not fit to eat." "Well, we'll fix you right up," he said. "Right, honey?" Victoria nodded, took my hand, and escorted me out the door. "Give me a half-pound cheeseburger with bacon," he shouted to the cooks as I left. "I have a surprise for you," Victoria said, patting me on the forearm and leading me to a small table at the back of the room. "What's this?" I asked. She nodded toward the waitress stand, and I turned around. Some long-legged, red-headed girl was filling a tray with sodas. My eyes widened when I guessed who it was. "Is that—" "Sure, Nikki," she said. "Just started working a couple months ago." I said nothing else but thanks as Victoria wheeled me over to my table, then turned and hovered over the other tables. Like the bar, I recognized quite a few people in the dining room. It was nice to see some of the people I'd gone to school with trying to feed their kids in between bites of their own food. And the whole place looked like any other thriving diner in Middle America, meaning everyone looked happy at the end of a long day and satisfied with a good meal with friends and family. My throat cleared next to me, and I turned and looked into the most beautiful blue eyes God ever created. Amy Standish in the flesh, and she hadn't changed much in the last 10 years. Same long, thick red hair, high cheekbones, and tiny dimple on her chin. "Hi, Amy," I said in a stuttering voice. "Hi," she said, glancing around the room and the other tables, then turned back to me. "Vicky said they already brought you a burger, so I just need your drink order." No smile, no recognition, nothing. Just impatience to get my order, return it to me, and go back to the other tables. "Please," I said, holding out my nearly empty bottle of Miller Lite to her. She nodded, made a note in her notebook, and walked away. I watched her walk away, then saw her return to my table, set down the fresh beer and pick up the empty one, then set down the ketchup and mustard bottles. "Burger will be here in a minute," she said, and disappeared. Amy Standish, my unrequited high school sweetheart? She was in my class, and I tried for a long time to get her to acknowledge my existence. But she never acknowledged it. Even looked at me like I was crazy when I barely asked her to the homecoming dance. Don't get me wrong, she wasn't a snob or anything. Lord knows we had enough of those in high school who only stopped at quarterbacks and track stars and wrestling champions and star outfielders. None of them managed to pay attention to an average lowlife like me, despite my pedigree and my father's last appearance on The Tonight Show. No, Amy wasn't one of them at all. Rather, she was the brains of the class, the senior who stayed out of the way of almost everyone else. Occasionally, she could be seen chatting with a group of other brainiacs, perhaps sorting out some geometry proofs or discussing chemical reactions. But usually she just walked two in from class, occasionally stopping at her locker, looking straight ahead and rarely recognizing those around her. We were seniors in high school, and by the time she got a job as a waitress, I was already working as a cook at the Hitchhiker's truck stop. In my spare time, I would stand in the kitchen and watch her run from table to table, from the kitchen to the waitress stand. She rarely said a word to anyone unless it was absolutely necessary to clarify an order or answer a direct question. A faint smile played on her lips. She nodded meaningfully, then fidgeted. Noticing my admiration, Ron said to me one evening, "Don't do anything, you won't get anything." This, of course, led to a rejection at graduation, and I went back to tell Ron about it. He only nodded and turned away without saying a word. Figuring he thought I was as pathetic as Amy made me out to be, I put it out of my mind. A week later, however, Ron came up behind me as I stood at the kitchen door again, watching Amy. "Victoria says she's shy," he told me. "That's why you almost never hear her say anything. Says her parents made her take this job to beat the shyness. I mean her shyness. And Vic thinks she's coming around." I nodded. At this rate, no doubt I'd be on Social Security by the time I managed to engage her in a meaningful conversation. But the conversation never materialized. 10 months later, the weekend before we both left for our first semester of college, I managed to get a "Hey, Nick" from her. It was the first and last time she said my name, and I still remember my unbridled joy at the thought of her knowing my name. And truth be told, over the years I have sometimes remembered the smile on her face as she spoke to me, and only me, that one time. My heart still flutters at the thought of it. Chapter 10. "So what's up with Amy?" I asked Jimmy Schultz. We were sitting at a table at the bar drinking beer and reminiscing about our high school years. Jimmy had been a star runner in high school and now worked as an insurance agent in Grant City, occupying his father's office on Main Street. "Still got a thing for her, huh?" he said. Without waiting for an answer, he turned and followed her gaze. Yeah, who doubted? We both watched her for a minute before Jimmy spoke again. She was tall, about 5'8". "Met someone in college," he said. "An engineer, I think. To tell you the truth, I only met him once. They had lunch here about 3 years ago. Anyway, he was a lot like her, only even more so. All quiet, never said boo to anyone about anything." He took a long sip of beer. "Looks like they got married right out of college," Jimmy continued. "They had a little boy. They lived somewhere in New York or something. She was teaching, I guess, and he was in engineering. Then about a year ago, she came back to town with a little son in her arms. I can't remember his name, but he's a cute little bugger. There was no wedding ring, and neither was Albert. They say he left with a coworker. A male colleague, if you know what I mean." He looked at me as he said the last word, but I'm sure my poker face was hiding my thoughts. "I guess it doesn't surprise you much since you live in California and all?" Jimmy said with a snicker. "So what's she doing now?" I asked, trying to get the conversation back on track. Jimmy laughed at that. "Well," he said, taking a drag, "she's an English teacher at the middle school. And on Thursdays and Fridays, she works here. I think her parents are watching the little girl." "Is she seeing someone?" I asked. "Wow, kid," Jimmy said, turning around and looking at me full in the eye. "You're married to one of the cutest babes in the world. Save some for the rest of us, okay?" I smiled, which apparently reassured him. He turned away and looked at Amy, following her with his eyes. "Anyway, the only answer is no. She's not dating anyone. God knows we've all tried. Hell, she's blown me off more times than I can count." "Then why do you keep asking?" said I. "Just trying to get her off my back," he sighed. We both finished our beers, and I went to the bar to get us some more. There are no waitresses in Grant City, Illinois. There never have been, and there never will be. "Do you see Teddy at all?" I asked, placing a new bottle in front of Jimmy. "Sure," he replied, finishing the rest of the last bottle and picking up a new one. "All the time. Where does he live?" "On Foster Road," said Jimmy, "a good place north of the Jenkins farm. What's he doing with himself at present?" Jimmy looked at me, disbelief reflected on his face. "Jesus, Nick, when was the last time you talked to him?" I avoided his gaze as I answered. 6 years ago. At the Grammys, we had a couple beers together after we won the prize for Song of the Year." Jimmy set his bottle down resolutely and stared at me, mouth wide open. "What the hell? You guys were closer than ticks the whole time? You mean you haven't seen him in 6 years?" I nodded. "It's just, I don't know. He didn't have much to say the last time," I explained. "Then we got so busy. You know, life and stuff." He nodded, but I could see in his eyes that he couldn't believe it. "Well," Jimmy said, "those royalty checks he's been getting and continues to get have been hamstringing him. Nothing much, of course, but he's got a real nice place now. And he's married." Judging by the raised eyebrows, that was a surprise to me. Jimmy grinned. "Jenny Lydon," he said. "They have a couple of little girls, both of whom look like 2 drops of water like Jenny. He teaches middle school, too, also English, just like Amy. I think they're very good friends. You always see them chatting when he's here." "So he stops by here sometimes?" I asked, looking around to see if Teddy was here. He wasn't. Jimmy jerked his head toward the poster on the wall. I read Mustang Ranch Friday, the 17th of July. Life from 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock. Teddy's face was in the center of the group photo in the center of the poster. I laughed. What a freak, I said. He quit Leadfoot because he didn't want to do it, and here he is in his spare time playing in some bar band. Jimmy just shrugged. Maybe he's just happier that way. It took me a minute to realize that Jimmy had hit it right on the mark. Teddy had never wanted fame and all the problems that went along with it. No, Teddy just wanted to teach somewhere and maybe, if he had free time, play music for the pleasure of playing music. Then I remembered the last time we saw each other, drinking beer at Spago, shouting through the noisy crowd, trying to hear each other, all the while Teddy fidgeting nervously in the crowd of people who had seen and been seen. He was like a fish out of water in a situation I'd long since gotten used to. That was just the way it was. Teddy just wanted a normal life, the kind his mom and dad had before him, with a wife and kids, a satisfying job, and some music on the side for fun. He knew what fame would bring, knew it before any of us, and wanted no part of it. Then came my first and long-awaited realization. Teddy was doing better than I was. Much better. Chapter 10. You look like someone hit you in the face with a shovel, Walter said as we drove home in the silent darkness. It's just that I've suddenly got something to think about, I said. Don't tell me Jimmy Schultz finally had something intelligent to say, he said. No, I replied. That's not it. To tell you the truth, he wasn't that smart. Just common sense, which I seem to have completely lost lately. I turned halfway down the block and met Walter's gaze. Mom was originally from here, I said. Of course, Walter agreed. Tyler, 15 miles down the road, and you were from Chicago. Oak Brook, he corrected. Close enough, I said. Chicago, posh suburb. No difference at all. But she was also, her parents, they were regular small-town folks. A pharmacist and a housewife, he nodded. So, but your dad was an editor at the Tribune and your mom was a socialite. If the story you told us to be believed, she came from an old packing house. She did, he defended himself. Still, what's your point? I started walking again before answering. My point, I said, is that you two were doomed from the start. She's a small-town girl from a typical small-town family. You're a big city guy from a rich, powerful family. You've spent your whole life surrounded by famous and glamorous people, while your mom spent her time at soda fountains and Beiju with her boyfriends. He nodded, catching the gist of it. So we were doomed from the start. Well, I said, your behavior didn't help much. It's bad enough when we have so little in common. You seem to have only made it worse by sleeping with every starlet you have your eye on. Did Jimmy come up with all this? Asked Walter. No, it was me. It was just something Jimmy said that gave me the idea. And what did he say? I shook my head. It's not about what he said. It's about the fact that I didn't think of it first. And what was it? He said Teddy had exactly what he wanted. He had a small-town dream, and I damn near choked on my beard at such a stupid thought, such a small dream, until I realized I was looking at it from Hollywood's point of view. From a superstar's point of view, I stopped again and looked at Walter. Walter, I said, I forgot about those dreams. Teddy has his royalty money, but he's happier with his family, his career, and his little bar band than I am with my superstar wife, my mansion, 10 times the money he has, and no family. I snorted. Hell, my best friend is a damn ghost that I didn't even like when he was alive. Walter watched me closely until the last of it. Then a hurt expression appeared on his face, and before I could apologize, he was gone. He did that sometimes, disappearing in a flash when I said something that pissed him off. But he always came back, ruffling his feathers and demanding the apology I'd usually given before. The first time Walter appeared before me was after a concert in Dallas about a year after he was killed. I thought someone had put water in my bottle when I turned around and saw him sitting there looking at me with a glint of humor in his eyes. I had already tried acid in the early glory years of the band, but this was like nothing I had ever done before. For one thing, it was too realistic, and the conversation that followed was too rational. So I spent the next 3 months talking to Walter when no one else was around. By the way, that's the only time he shows up when I'm alone. Then I got too creepy. Despite Walter's repeated protests that I wasn't crazy, I decided to see a doctor. The first view, assuming all this tabloid nonsense was true, advised me to give up the sauce. When I told them it had happened in my past, they replied that it was probably residual. Still miserable, still seeing a protesting Walter a couple times a week, I finally found someone who ran me through a full battery of tests. Thank God I didn't have schizophrenia, but Dr. Salomon still couldn't find anything wrong with me. 4 months of therapy followed, which Tara explained by saying that I just needed someone to help me cope with the stress. I didn't know that she saw nothing unusual about seeing a therapist, which was all too common among the whole acting crowd, and for that matter was a sign of true sensitivity and self-actualization. At the end of therapy, Dr. Salomon closed his notebook, came out from behind his desk, and sat down in the chair next to me. "I'm going to tell you what I think it is," he said with an amused smirk on his face. "And what is that, Doc?" "Nick," he said, "I think you're being visited by a ghost." Seeing the surprise on my face, he hurried to continue. "Maybe not a real ghost, but a ghost from your past. You need to talk to someone who understands you. It helps you deal with the pressure. It's how your mind deals with everything. Your best friends, the ones who know you best, they're also members of your group, and they're part of what puts extra demands on you. Therefore, they are not part of the solution to help you cope. On the contrary, they are part of the problem that you need to deal with. No, Nick, you know who knows you best and can best help you deal with all of this? Walter, I guess?" He smiled and shook his head. "No, Nick, it's you. You're the one who can best help you through your problems." "No, Walter is. It's just me seeing things." He shrugged. "Admittedly, that's pretty rare, and images rarely last that long. Still, I think you have a lot of unresolved issues with your father, and I think you always wanted him to help you while you were growing up. But now that you really need help, he's gone. So yes, I think your subconscious mind is creating an image for you to work out your problems with. And since your father was the person you always wanted the most, I think the image your subconscious created is Walter." I nodded. "Makes sense. So is there any cause for concern?" Dr. Salomon smiled. "No, Nick, honestly. While it's unusual, I think it's a very healthy way to deal with the stress you're feeling. And I think that as this all settles down, you'll start seeing Walter less and less and just have these little conversations in your head, free of images." I was feeling better until Walter showed up the next afternoon while I was banging out the lyrics to a song. "Have you ever heard such a load of crap in your life?" he said. "I'm not listening to myself right now," I replied, not taking my eyes off the lyrics. "I'm not you, dumbass," he said. "I'm me, your father, and I'm going to prove it to you." I looked up, skepticism written all over my face. "I'm going to tell you something you don't know," he said. "Things you've never known and things no one else has ever known either. Will that help?" I laughed, and he proceeded to make Dr. Salomon look like an idiot. Walter's last long-lost manuscript, the one hidden in a fake log in a cabin I'd never been to, was published 8 months later, to great fanfare. Chapter 11. A few beers, good conversation, and a late-night walk. Oh, and a bacon cheeseburger the size of a black bear's ass that I barely made it halfway through, ensured a great night's sleep. When I woke up Friday morning, the sun had long since risen and the house was silent. The clock next to my bed showed it was almost 9, and I stretched lazily as a smile appeared on my face. "Damn it," I thought, looking at my cheerful face in the mirror while shaving. "Where the hell have you been? Where has the usually cheerful Nick been hiding lately? If that's all it is, I should have gone home a long time ago to recharge. Even the 23 voicemail messages on my cell phone, all of which I deleted on the spot, didn't spare me a smile. Jumping down the steps, I grabbed a yogurt from the fridge and ate it. Then I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The only thing wrong with Grant City so far is the lack of a Starbucks. And while it brewed, went out to the driveway and dropped off my guitars and rocking chair from the Escalade. For the first time in a year, I was in the mood to write music, and I wasn't about to pass up the opportunity. So I wrote for almost 11 hours. Bob stopped by to see me at lunchtime, but I gave up everything and kept working. I was in a zone I hadn't been in for a couple years, a zone where fresh ideas come hot and heavy, and I filled half my notebook with interesting chord progressions and notes on tempo, melody line, and other basic thoughts. I read somewhere about how Lennon and McCartney wrote Hard Day's Night. The story went that Ringo, while on set during the filming of a movie, suggested the title based on one of his witty lines. The director liked the title, but noticed that there was no song to it. There was no problem with that. Lennon and McCartney set to work that night, and by the next morning, they had the whole song written: chords, melody, lyrics, and tempo. It's a zone, and it comes and goes. Unless, of course, you're Lennon and McCartney, those assholes stayed in the zone for decades. When Mom and Bob left to fry fish, I gave up and finished the main melody of the second song. It wasn't quite there yet, but I knew I was getting close. I also knew that my strength was running out, and further effort would only result in things changing the next day. Hence, it was time to call it a day, feed my belly, and see if Teddy's group was worth giving a damn about. It took me longer to pack than I thought it would, and the walk from my mom's house to the bar took another 20 minutes. By the time I got to Hitchhikers, the music had already started. When I walked in, the bar was full of people, and the dining room was full of people. A band, unseen somewhere in a far corner, was playing an old Ernest Tubb number, Walking the Floor Over You, and they were pretty good at it. They brought a nice upbeat vibe to the old classic, and at the heart of the song was a very catchy piano part. "You're back," Victoria whispered in my ear from behind me. I turned, smiled at her, and looked over her shoulder into the dining room. "How long do you expect to have a table, darling?" She only laughed, took my hand, and pulled me into the kitchen. "Guess who's back?" shouted Victoria, pushing through the door into the kitchen. I saw Ron and Amy talking, but their conversation stopped, and Amy turned away as I looked out from behind Victoria. "Ron," she ordered, "make Nicky something to eat, okay?" He smiled. "Is it too crowded in there?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before asking what I wanted. I ordered a grilled chicken breast sandwich and fruit. "Amy, honey," Victoria said, "could you get Nicky a beer from the bar?" Amy nodded and muttered, "Sure." Then she slipped out the door, sidestepping me. "I told you," Victoria said. I turned around. They were both looking at me, and now it was my turn to stutter. Well, she looks really good, don't you think?" Victoria glared, and Ron raised his eyes to the sky and pleaded, "Please help him grow a pair." I laughed. I ate my sandwich and fruit and drank my beer in the kitchen, exchanging phrases with Ron, while he and the guys sent off some last-minute orders and appetizers while cleaning up all the equipment and dirty dishes. Finished with the food, I left them to clean up. Back at the bar, I spotted Jimmy Schultz leaning against the wall, chatting with Jenny Cooper, née Leiden. She hadn't changed much, maybe put on 10 or 15 pounds, and there were a few wrinkles on her face. Otherwise, she looked the same as when we went to the ball. She swayed to the beat of the music, never taking her eyes off the stage and listening to everything Jimmy said. "Buy you guys a drink," I said, walking over to them when the song ended. "Nick!" Jenny shrieked, jumping to me and hugging me. "Jimmy said you were back." I looked at him over her shoulder, and he nodded in greeting. "I'll get the drinks," he said. "You'll be busy." "So when did you hear?" I asked when she finally loosened her grip. While Teddy and the guys were setting up, she replied. Her eyes turned to the stage, and Teddy watched us with a puzzled expression. Then he lifted his chin in greeting, and I raised my beer in response. "Nick," Jenny said, "he wants to know if you'll play one song with them. 3 of the guys are in college, and he says their lives would be complete if they played with you on stage. Would you do it? For old time's sake?" Her puppy eyes were pleading. "Sure, Jenny," I said. "Tell him I'll play something with them when they're ready." Before I could respond, she twisted out of my embrace. "He said he'd do it, Teddy." Suddenly, all eyes in the establishment were on me. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," Teddy said, "you're in for a real treat tonight." I looked around and assessed their gazes. There was a look of surprised anticipation on the faces of those who knew who I was, which was most of them. "That's right," Teddy continued. "The old wind is back in town, and he's here tonight." A few people whistled, and a few women applauded. "I heard that Well, this guy knows his way around a guitar," Teddy said, and I could hear the humor in his voice. "Hell, some people think he can even sing, though I'm not one of them." The crowd was already laughing and clapping, so maybe if we ask him nicely, we can talk him into coming here and singing a couple songs. Teddy waved his hand over his guitar and headed toward me. "What do you say, folks? Anyone want to see if Nick Harlan can still play the old songs?" The crowd erupted into cheers, and I nearly burst into tears. It had been 10 years since I'd played for these people, and barring TV appearances, it had been 9 years since I'd played in front of less than 15,000 screaming fans. At that moment, I would have given every damn arena in the country for one more ovation from these people I'd known all my life. "Look at that," Teddy teased as I made my way toward the stage, wiping tears from my eyes. "He's nervous." I jumped onto the crowded little platform of the stage and pressed myself against Teddy. "You're a freak," I said. Then I put my arms around his guitar and he hugged me back with such energy that my heart nearly burst with shame. Why had it taken us so long to talk? The crowd started chanting for us to play something, and Teddy whispered, "Maybe we should stop this little love fest for a while before we get tired and feathered." I laughed, broke the embrace, and picked up my acoustic guitar. After looking around for a chord, the bassist rushed to my aid. "Here you are, Mr. Harlan," he said, looking nervous as hell and excited at the same time. I smiled. "This is Nick," I said, plugging a chord into the guitar. "Is the mixing desk balanced for this?" I asked Teddy. He nodded. "When we heard you were back, we had a feeling we'd better be ready for another instrument." "So, what's on your mind?" I smiled. "Two angels?" Teddy's smile spread from ear to ear, and I wondered if he had the same memory as me. "You heard him, boys," he called out, and then turned to me and said, "The piano is going to lead us to it." And so it did, soon joined by my rhythm and simultaneously by Teddy's drums, bass, and wispy slide guitar. When the vocals started, Teddy and I shared the mic the whole time, keeping the guitars away from each other. We then moved into a lengthy instrumental which, in a new twist on the arrangement, showcased the kid on piano in a very effective way. By the end of the song, listening to the crowd screaming and demanding a continuation, it was as if we had never parted. Teddy was as good as ever on lead vocals, and his voice had much more range than I remembered. I suddenly wanted to see how good these guys were, to see if this was really Teddy's hobby or still his passion. When the applause died down, Teddy waved me over. "Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank Nick Harlan for coming here." I bowed in response to the applause and then turned to Teddy. "I'd like to stay here for a while if that's okay with you," I whispered. Teddy smiled lazily. "I think I'd like that." He turned to the rest of the group. "Do you think you can keep up with us?" They all nodded, and Teddy turned to me again. "So what's next?" And we started playing Bob Dylan's acclaimed song, Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts. It was a 9-minute number, and they really had improved the backing arrangement. The drummer, bassist, and I kept the basic rhythm, but Teddy improvised, doing little touches, and that kid on the piano was great. By the time we finished, the people were pouring through the door, and there was almost no room left in the dance area. I stayed there for the rest of the show, sitting with the band during breaks and signing autographs for anyone who asked. We performed mostly country rock covers, Return of the Grievous Angel by Graham Parsons, Angel is the Devil by Steve Earle, quite a bit of John Hyatt and the Jayhawks, and Dead Flowers by the Rolling Stones. We only played 2 Leadfoot songs, both of which Teddy and I wrote together. By the last hour of the concert, we became aware that cars were lined up along the street for several blocks, and you couldn't move in the entire building. At 1:20, we ended the show with a tight, sweet 4-part harmony version of the old Poco classic, Keep On Tryin'. The audience was going crazy, and we would have played longer, but this song pretty much ended our set for the day. I helped the band pile out and spread out in cars and vans, accepting free beer from the crowd and tons of claps on the back. By the time we were done, the bar was closed, and the bartenders were sweeping up and wiping spilled beer off the floor and tables. A few people were sitting around the bar drinking their last beers in the dim bar area. Ron, Victoria, Jenny, Teddy, the rest of the band, and I were here. And Ron was telling us that we should do this more often so he could retire one day. Then I heard a quiet but clear voice behind me. Now I think I understand what all the fuss is about. I turned around. It was Amy, and her eyes met mine and lingered on them. I was at a loss for words. "Do you have the tongue of a cat, Nick?" teased Jenny. She was out the door before I could respond. "You're still partial to her, aren't you?" said Teddy. "Of course I'm partial," Victoria replied. "Just too afraid to do anything about it," said Ron. California ruined him, I just smiled. You know, I said. That's the most she's ever said to me. Ever? Yeah, Teddy said. Let me tell you. When you get to know her better, she's just a goddamn magpie. It just takes time to get to know her better, that's all. But you don't have to do that, Jenny said. You're married and we don't want her to get too close to. Teddy finished the thought. We don't want her to get hurt. She's been through enough already, Victoria stared at me. I tried to hide it, but I know I flinched at least a little. At the mention of my marriage, and Victoria saw it. She whispered something to her husband, and Ron only nodded. He saw that look, too. I'm sure he'd already guessed I was in trouble, so the flinch no doubt only confirmed his suspicions. What are you doing tomorrow? Asked Teddy. I shrugged. Probably just going to pee, I said. I'm in the zone and I don't want to waste it. He nodded, realizing what I was saying. Then he turned to Jenny and raised his eyebrows. She noticed the look and turned to me. We want you to come to our house and cook a meal, she said. About an hour. We have about 30 people coming over, and the band will be practicing for their entertainment. Why don't you grab your guitar and join in? When I didn't answer right away, Jenny leaned over and put her hand on mine. We really want you to meet our girls, she said. And Amy will be there with her little boy, too. That was settled, and the smile I tried to hide told them all that I would be there. Getting up to leave, Teddy said. You could use some normal people for a change. Enjoy another typical small-town hangout. If only we all knew then how wrong Teddy was. The next day in Grant City, Illinois, you would turn out to be anything but typical. Chapter 12. Saturday I slept until almost 11 o'clock. I would have kept sleeping and probably would have been late for the party, but Mom's voice came loudly and insistently to me through the noise of the crowd outside. Get off my lawn! She yelled. If you damage those roses, I'll pull your hides. I lay frozen in place. I'd been in this situation 1,000,000 times before, and I knew what that noise was that was causing her to yell. A quick glance out the window confirmed my suspicions. There he is, the shrewd operator called out, and I ducked down. My body went into automatic mode. I quickly shaved, showered, brushed my teeth, and dressed in casual but stylish clothes. Show up in front of the press looking like a star and you'd be crucified. Your adoring fans never pictured you with your head in bed. If they in the press saw you looking like a regular guy, then, oh, horror, you must be hooked on something. 15 minutes later, I trotted down the stairs, out the door, and stood next to Mom on the porch. I'll handle this, I said, giving her a smile before turning to face the 12 or so reporters and cameraman. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I said, get off the lawn and onto the sidewalk. Then come over here and we'll do a little interview, okay? They obeyed, as I knew they would. If they wanted an interview, they had to at least play ball to some degree. When everyone was gathered on the porch, I laid down the ground rules. So we'll start with the ladies first, and then we'll go from left to right. Fair? They agreed, and some young hottie from Entertainment Tonight started. Nick, the YouTube videos of you and Teddy Cooper have already racked up over 10 million views, and they were posted less than 8 hours ago. Are you leaving Leadfoot and going to start a new band? Oh, shit, I thought. The goddamn age of the internet. But I kept my smile and replied, I don't plan on leaving Leadfoot, I said. I'm back home visiting family and friends, and Teddy asked me to join them on stage last night. As you know, we're longtime friends, and he was one of the founders of Leadfoot. I couldn't say no, and we had a lot of fun together. But you left in the middle of negotiations to record an album, said a woman in her 30s, her hair fixed with a spray bottle and her dark blue suit impeccable on this sweltering Saturday morning. There are rumors in Los Angeles that you've had enough and are leaving, that you don't want to sign a new contract to record the Leadfoot album. Is there any truth to those rumors? I shook my head. No. We have a very capable manager, Ethan Rose, who is in charge of negotiations. I just needed a break, and here I am. What about the rumors that you and Tara Boyd are having problems? One of the men asked. And that she's now dating your bandmate, Carl Simpson, another asked right after him. I smiled and tried to avoid the questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Tara and I are very much in love, I said. She's busy getting ready for the new season, and I just figured it was a good time to take a break. That's all. They tried for another half hour to get me to elaborate on my answers, but I managed to dodge them and continue with my main story. Seeing that the matter was quickly coming to a conclusion, they thanked me for my time, apologized to Mom for the damage they had caused, and went back to their vans to edit the interview for the evening news. I apologized to Mom and then told her I was going to Teddy's for dinner. She said she'd been invited a few weeks ago, and she and Bob would probably stop by when he got back from the office. Then I packed my 2 guitars into the Escalade and got an early start. I took the long way down country roads to make sure none of the news hounds were on my trail and pulled up to Teddy's house at 12:30. This way, I heard Teddy's voice as I got out of the car. I followed the sound of his voice and the smell of roast pork shoulder to the back of the house. He was standing on the porch smoking a lot of pork shoulder in a huge smokehouse. A little away from him, 3 little kids, 2 girls and a boy were splashing around in the shallow edge of the in-ground pool. "Pretty interesting morning, huh?" he said, looking at me as he sipped his iced tea. "Were they here too?" I asked. He nodded, seeming none too pleased with this development. "What did you do?" He smiled. "Told them to get off my land or I'd call the police and have them all arrested for trespassing." I laughed. Wish I could do that. I grabbed a can of Diet Pepsi from a nearby cooler and sat down in one of the lawn chairs, watching him rub something on his pork shoulders before closing the lid and sitting down next to me. For the next 20 minutes, we chatted about everything in the world, all the while watching the kids in the pool. It started out pretty serious. I apologized for having so little contact with him over the past 6 years, but he brushed me off, genuinely understanding. "That's why I never wanted this life," he said, "but you wanted it, and I know how busy you are." That was his last word on the matter. The apology was obviously accepted. Then he told me who else was married, had children, and worked where he had been seriously involved with me before. "Why did you come back?" he asked. I didn't answer, preferring to stare at the grove of oaks in the distance. "You can talk to me, you know," he said, his voice low. I didn't say anything for a minute, but then I turned and looked at him. "Teddy, are you happy?" He had a perplexed look on his face. "Of course I'm happy." "Are you?" I sighed. "I don't think so." Teddy didn't say anything back. "It's not what I thought," I continued. "Oh, I guess it is, but I'm starting to realize it's not what I want anymore. It's too much." "Then leave," he said. "It's simple, just go." Walter said the same thing, but it sounded much stronger coming from Teddy. "It's not that simple," I objected. "I have commitments. There are the guys in the band, they're all counting on me, and I have a wife. Hell, she's never going to move here." He nodded. "Are the rumors true?" My eyes narrowed as I looked at him. The reporters were asking questions before they finally left. He explained. One of them said Carl was sleeping with Tara. He saw the look on my face and nodded. "He tried to do it with Jenny once," Teddy said. "A few years ago, when his folks had a big anniversary party, he came back to town for a few days. He tried to get Jenny to join him in the hotel room, so Teddy smiled. She splashed a drink in his face, quickly put out his fire. I laughed. "Well," I said, "Tara seems to have lit the fire, so what are you going to do?" I shrugged. "I don't know, Teddy. Honestly, I love her. I love being around her. She's fun, funny, sweet, and charming. And in bed, I guess, too. I'm comfortable around her, I think. The thought of changing all that scares me." "Let that thought go," Teddy said, got up from his chair and went into the house. He came back a minute later with 2 mugs of beer and held one out to me. "So have you talked to her about it yet?" he asked. I shook my head. "Tried to, but she won't do it until we're face-to-face, and I'm afraid to do it face-to-face right now. I'm afraid I'll just take her back and it'll all happen again." He nodded. "Well, buddy, let me offer my 2 cents. He sipped his beer and continued. "You need to find out why she did it. Don't worry about the fact that she did it. That's been dealt with. The why is what will help you figure out if she'll do it again." He smiled broadly, then said, "Unless, of course, this California thing has changed you enough that you don't mind sharing it. I've been told you famous types cut loose on shit like that." I laughed. "No," I confirmed, "she didn't change me that much." "Anyway, some people are just that way, both guys and girls," Teddy said. "They don't see it as a big deal. Whether they were brought up that way or whether they're set up that way, I don't know. But if you find out the reason, you'll realize if it was just a one-time mistake or the first of many to follow, then you have to ask yourself if you can live with it if it happens again. I know you say you don't like it, but what if it happens 5 years from now? Will you give it another try, wondering how long it will be before it happens again? I nodded, mulling over his words. Walter hadn't quite put it that way, but then again, he hadn't liked her from day one. So you could forgive Jenny if you got into something like this. I'd like to think so, he replied. But then again, it all depends on the reason. He leaned forward. Let me tell you something, he said. I won't mention any names, but let's just say you know them. Anyway, he caught her and her boyfriend doing the dirty deed. It was the first time in her life, and he's sure she told the truth about that part, but the main reason is why he dumped her. Which is what exactly? I asked. The fact that she didn't love him anymore. He looked me straight in the eye. Some people can't stand the thought of being alone, so they harness a new horse before they cross the old one out of the herd. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it's often the case. That's exactly what she did. She found someone she thought could be moved from her home to his, and she was kind of taking him for a test drive. I mulled that over. So if Tara just got herself into a bad situation, maybe for whatever reason didn't fight temptation the way she should have. Like you guys are going over rocks or something, he suggested. Okay, so you're saying I should just forget about it then? No, I'm not saying you should forget about it, but I am saying you should consider it when deciding what to do with your marriage. He leaned back in his chair. Nick, everyone is different. But if you really and truly love her and you're sure she really and truly loves you back, then maybe you should consider trying to fix the lawnmower before you throw it away and buy a new one. Unless, of course, the evidence suggests that the lawnmower is too damn broken to be fixed. I spit out a mouthful of beer onto the half deck. Did you just compare me to a lawnmower? Y'all Jenny from the kitchen window. No, honey, Teddy shouted back. Then he leaned closer. Only you can make those decisions, Nick. You know that, don't you? Only you can know if you can save a good marriage. All I can tell you is that shit like this, no matter how wrong it is, and it is wrong, happens to marriages all the time, and people get over it and are happily married for 50 years. I nodded, and we turned the conversation to other topics as people started to show up. After about 15 minutes of our little conversation, it was my turn to get a beer. I went into the kitchen and froze when I saw Jenny and Amy whispering at the sink, stirring coal, slaw, and potato salad in large bowls. They froze upon noticing my presence, and Jenny tried to give it away with a quick hug and a peck on the cheek. Amy, however, couldn't make eye contact with me, and she barely managed to mutter a hello in response to my greeting. They were talking about me, and I worried that they had heard too much about my conversation with Teddy. Returning to the deck with an armful of beer and sodas, I passed them around. Is something wrong? Asked Teddy. I shook my head and tried to go back to my conversation with Will, the pianist from the night before, about who was better, Warren Zevon or Ray Charles. After much discussion and too much participation from the rest of us, we agreed that it was too much like comparing apples to oranges, although Ray Charles was certainly the better jazz player, and Warren Zevon was the more versatile songwriter. When about 35 people had gathered, we decided it was a good time to turn up the music. Best to get the entertainment over with before we got drunk and stained all our instruments with pig grease. Everyone gathered in the shed, which was trimmed on the inside enough to allow us to organize a full sound on a small scale, and I brought my guitars from the car and plugged them into the spare amps that stood nearby. After about 45 minutes, Teddy asked me to play Time to Start Again, a hugely successful ballad from our first album and one of the first songs Teddy and I wrote. It was about a painful breakup, and the singer was trying to convince a rejected lover that he should try love again. The best arrangement consisted of only vocals with minimal harmonies, accompanied by fingerstyle guitar and a soft piano line. I agreed and sat on a stool behind the vocalist's microphone, started the guitar part, and waited for the piano to start. When the piano part started, I looked around the crowd and saw Amy standing behind me, slowly swaying to the beat of the music. Her eyes were fixed on me and mine on hers, and that's how they stayed throughout the song. For some reason, and hell, I know the reason perfectly well, I put my heart and soul into it, turning an already sad song into a real emotional roller coaster. At the end, when the spurned lover replies that he just doesn't know if he's ready and the instruments fall silent, you could hear a pin drop. Then I felt a slap on my hand and turned away from Amy. Everyone in the room looked at us back and forth. Amy noticed it too and turned bright red while I tried to focus on something else. "I think it's time for a little break, guys, don't you?" suggested Will from the piano. Everyone agreed, and they all started heading out of the barn in search of cold beer and lemonade. In a little over a minute, there was no one left in the barn but me and Amy. I was still sitting on the stool, and she was still standing 30 feet away from us. "I heard all that conversation," she said after a moment. "You and Teddy out on the deck." I tried to smile, but couldn't. "Yeah, well, I'm sorry," she said. "I know what it's like, and I have an idea of what you're going through." "Thank you," I finally managed to say. What the hell was wrong with me? She had talked to me more in the last 24 hours than she had in the previous 24 years combined. I only uttered 3 syllables in response. "Did you like it?" I tried. "The song?" She snorted a few times. "It was beautiful," she said. Then she tried to laugh. "I swear, Nick, if I go outside right now, I'm going to burst into tears." I smiled. Then I moved the capodastar on the guitar's fingerboard to the 2nd fret and started playing another number. "Maybe this will cheer you up," I said. I started singing If I Only Had a Brain from The Wizard of Oz. Tears appeared in the corners of her eyes, but she started wiping them away and laughing, her lips occasionally synchronizing the words of the song. Toward the end, I heard her faint soprano voice, which she sang as an encore. Finished, I patted the seat of the stool next to me. "Come on," I encouraged. "Let's sing some more." She looked over her shoulder hesitantly. "Don't make me ask for more," I said, maybe a little too seriously. In any case, she was soon sitting next to me. I fiddled with the guitar for a few minutes, occasionally glancing at her and smiling when our eyes met. I noticed that she was less shy, so I decided to just say what Ron had been trying to get me to say for 10 years. I stopped playing and folded my hands over the guitar. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a very long time," I began. Her face turned serious, and there was a tinge of fear in her eyes. "I don't want this to sound wrong, and I don't really—" "Neither am I," she cut in, placing her hand on my forearm and stroking it lightly. "Ever since you invited me to homecoming, I've been thinking about how different things would have been if I had been able to say yes." There was still a look of disbelief on my face, and it must have gotten more and more and more incredulous. "Say something, Nick." "Screw me," I whispered. "Didn't see that coming." She giggled, then laughed, and soon we were both laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. Then she grew serious. "But it's not going to do either of us any good right now," she said. "I'm not going to seduce you, and you damn well better not seduce me. You're married, Nick, and I'm not going to play the role of second woman in this little drama. After 10 years, I'm just glad we can both talk to each other in complete sentences, Amy. Honestly, I don't want to impose my baggage on anyone else right now." I lifted my head and looked her in the eyes again, especially someone I care so much about. "Okay?" she nodded. "And don't think I'll be there for you if you decide to leave her," Amy continued. "I want to be clear, Nick Harlan. I like you, but we don't know each other anymore. So you better not think you can just get a divorce and jump into my bed, okay? I'm not part of this equation. This is between you and your wife. Teddy's right. You have to decide what you want. I just want you to know that if you think you need me more than you need her, don't rely on that, got it?" I nodded, more than a little saddened. Truth be told, our unexpected conversation had made good old Tara almost jump out the door before the last little bit of conversation. Amy was right, so it was no surprise when we heard a helicopter come in for a landing nearby, and a whole bunch of new shit landed in my lap. Chapter 13. Wait, I know, it's a pretty long story, but I hope you enjoyed it. And if it hooked you, write in the comments and leave a like if you'd like a sequel. If I see enough feedback, I'll release a sequel to this story in a few hours. Anyway, thanks for watching.